Hi, good evening. It's John Hawkins Jr. This is our Tuesday night Facebook Live. We're here every Tuesday night at 8:15, where I answer any questions you guys have that come in throughout the week at johnhatgatewaycounseling.com. You can hit me up there anytime during the week. I'll respond to your questions that day or as fast as I can that day. And then also I can talk about them on the Facebook Live, or you can ask me questions on Facebook Live. I am a specialist in trauma and addiction, couples therapy, and peak performance coaching. And then we are a counseling center here in Boynton Beach, Florida, where we do individual, couple, family therapy for all your mental health, relational issues, spiritual issues, like I said, performance coaching, all that kind of stuff. So we have a mission and a vision to try to reach as many people as we can. So we do that in every way we can. With our center here, we do online stuff, we do social media platforms, anything we can to get information out, connect with people, help people, and then you guys can be a part of us helping other people. Hi, how's it going today? That I've found over the years a lot of stuff that I think is kind of basic things for me for what I do. People have never heard of, or if they've got inaccurate information, especially in relation to trauma. I get new clients all the time who've been through years and years of therapy, and in the first 5 or 10 minutes, I'm explaining things that they've never heard before. So it doesn't surprise me anymore, but it used to shock me that, in all these years you haven't heard of this stuff. So I think, more information is out there than ever, and we just want to be a part of spreading more, in any way we can help people. So tonight, one of the questions I got, what I want to talk to you about is grief. And so there's some misunderstandings about grief. I'm gonna get into that. So I think some of that, unless you've been under a rock the last few days, with the death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter and the other people that were in a helicopter that crashed in California. And so it has brought up a lot of different grief topics, and people have been asking me questions about that. So I want to talk about that. So first thing I wanted to talk about is, a lot of people are familiar with the stages of grief, which are these 5 stages that have gotten popularized. There's denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, all this kind of stuff. And so there's a big misnomer about that you just move through these stages. So the book and the research that was based around was a lady named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book on death and dying. So she researched and interviewed a lot of people who were dying. So it wasn't, the research and the stages were not around the people grieving for them, but it was about their experience of coming to acceptance of their death. So some of those things do occur, like denial. I can't believe this happened. You kind of go into this shock stage. Everybody's had an experience, whether it was like hearing about Kobe Bryant's daughter or somebody in your life that I was just talking to him yesterday, or you get kind of numb or just surreal feelings. So it's the brain's way to absorb this information that's so impactful. You actually get a level of opioid release in the brain that then kind of creates some of that numbness or spacing or surrealness, depending on how intense it is, to mitigate the impact of the reality of it. So, we call that disassociation. So there's a level of that that's normal and healthy, and it helps kind of protect you from the impact. So when it's traumatic, it overrides your system, and you just get smacked with the awareness. There's different factors that I would say create a level of, high levels of intensity, like things like shock. So even though there's still pain and grief, and I'm not trying to diminish that in any way, but if you have a year or two of somebody struggling with an illness, the brain is having some time to absorb this reality. You have hope, and there's, again, the pain of the loss once it actually happens, but the brain gets to go through this process. When something is immediate or shocking, or just comes out of the blue, or doesn't fit the existing paradigm, like, okay, if your 80-year-old grandmother dies, my brain sees that as pretty normal, even though there's sadness there. But when an 8-year-old dies, it's kind of outside the normal, even though it happens. So it's a little more jolting to the brain. So, shock creates a big impact. I would say the other biggest impact in how grief affects us is whether there is resources there relationally after the fact. So if you have emotionally accessible people who can be there for you, help you grieve, support you, create a presence that's safe, that's going to have a huge impact on, you know, how that hits me. You're still going to have grieving to do, but it makes, you know, there's a couple, I would say, the biggest variables of why things have a heavier impact for some people than others. You've got a history of that, of having emotionally secure connection with people. You've already internalized a lot of that, so you're going to have a higher capacity to deal with those feelings of sadness and grief than somebody who didn't have the, you know, good fortune to get that kind of caretaking internalized. That, you know, things are going to hit them with, I would say, less of a shock absorber. So there's also a lot of overlap between trauma and grief. So in trauma, there's losses, you know, like let's say if it was childhood abuse or things like that, my innocence was taken away or my safety, so there's a loss. But then grief can be so intense because of those variables I talked about that it can traumatize you, and you can get PTSD from loss. So whenever you have overwhelming experience, emotions in the face of aloneness or helplessness, the brain is going to split off the amount that I can't handle, like a circuit breaker over there. And then what happens is it keeps it, you know, frozen there as a form of trauma. Maybe it gets all the way to the level of PTSD, maybe it's like a sub level, but then that doesn't move. Normal grief will flow where the trauma stays stuck, and then somebody could feel like, wow, you know, I just can't seem to move on, or I'm still grieving. It's likely, if that's the case, then you either have some level of trauma that's kind of sticking, or there's complications, you know, what they call complicated grief or complicated bereavement. So then, let's say, you know, the last thing you did was get in an argument with a person or say something hurtful, and so now you have this guilt about that, you haven't been able to resolve. And so that kind of, you know, I think of it like a stream, and it puts a boulder in the stream. So until you resolve the guilt, your grief can't flow normally. Or maybe, you know, you felt like in some way it was your fault. You know, I've had clients where they tried to resuscitate a loved one or give them CPR, or they felt like, okay, I put them through so much stress and they had a stroke or heart attack, it's my fault. And that has to be resolved so then you can grieve normally. So these are, you know, some complicating factors. If you're struggling with that, if your grief doesn't seem to be moving or diminishing over time, then there's probably a level of trauma or some complication that needs to be addressed so you can grieve normally. So in grieving normally, like I said, it's very individual like everything else. So forget a lot of the stuff you've been taught around stages of grief, because like I said, that was on people who were dying, not people who were grieving. So it's not a linear process. You know, you could go from denial, bargaining, you could be in anger, depression, you know, which is really like a really high level of grief in most cases, and moving into acceptance, and then go back to anger, back to denial, back. For me, like in most people I have worked with, it kind of cycles. You know, like a lot of times when I've been grieving big losses, that's what happens to me. There'll be this heavy sadness or grief, then there'll be maybe fear or anger. You start to accept it, but then you're back at the heavy sadness. You know, like, so I started kind of tracking that at times, the last couple things that I had to grieve, where it just felt like, okay, that's about right. It's about right on time for the sadness, and I know the anger is coming next, or then the acceptance, you know. So all that's normal. Just make space for whatever you're feeling. So the what you want to do in dealing with grief is you want to just, unless it's overwhelming and, you know, it's triggering disassociative numbness or panic and anxiety, but if it's just the feeling itself, you want to just allow yourself to feel it. So you can do that, you know, and then using things that can help you process it, which just means feel it to completion. So you could be with someone else, you could work with a therapist like me, you could work with family or member, a friend, where they're just being present with you, allowing you to feel it. When I'm doing grief work with people, I'm not doing a lot except just being present and being there. I'm not trying to cheer them up or say positive things. I'm just trying to connect with what they're feeling. Because a lot of times that will really send it the other way. Like with emotions, there's what's called attunement, where you really just connect with someone. You start to feel in your body, parts of your brain start to activate and mirror what they're feeling. If you come in, you start trying to be too encouraging or spiritualize things or whatever, even though they may be good things in and of themselves, but if this person's not feeling felt yet, it's just going to make them feel more and more frustrated and alone. So remember this, it's not what you say, it's just your presence. So it takes a lot of pressure off. I don't need to have the right thing to say. I don't have to worry about saying something stupid. The best thing is not to say much, to just be there, be present, be with someone in their emotions. Later at the right time, you can say those encouraging things when the person's open and they have felt like you've really been there and understood the level of pain that they're going through. So with, you could journal about things, you could listen to music, you could have different rituals. A lot of cultures have different ways they deal with grief or celebrate life. And, there's all kinds of different meanings for us culturally, family-wise, around death, things like that. A lot of times when you have something like what happened with Kobe Bryant, people are trying to make sense of it. For some reason, things like this happen every day to people, but they're not in our conscious awareness. Then we have somebody who seems, I think with a lot of celebrities, it seems almost like they're immortal or invincible. And then that's why I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around the tragedy when a celebrity dies, because it's like, wow, I just can't believe this happened. Or, you picture them like, being on a basketball court or a football field or acting in films where they're kind of captured in moments in time. And you're trying to make sense of tragedy. And for me, personally, I spent a lot of years reading philosophy, theology, psychology, trying to find answers to the whys. And I came to the conclusion there's always going to be a level of mystery, and there's always going to be some whys that are never going to be answered that I can't know. And my approach is more is what? What do I do with it? So, when I'm sitting in pain with someone, like, and they're, suffering a severe loss, they just need someone to be with them. And then once they've moved through enough of that, then comes the what question of what do I do with this? Do I let this define, the rest of my life? Do I close off and not open up my heart or allow people in? Or do I deal with my pain and then open myself up to life again? Or do I just keep looping on why? Because like I said, a lot of those whys, people come up with all kinds of theories, but they don't really capture in totality the why, and people aren't looking for, a bunch of different intellectual responses in those moments. Just need somebody to be with them. So if you're grieving, again, if it's not overwhelming, just feel it, reach out to other people, find your own personal ways, like whether, again, it's music, writing, journaling, you could watch a great film, whatever it may be. Hey babe, whatever it is to facilitate moving. You want to make sure that it's just moving, that they'll come in waves. You'll feel a little lighter after each wave. The more significant the person was to you, the more grief is going to be there. So don't, you lose a spouse, a child, a close friend, a parent. Don't let somebody tell you after a year and a half, oh, you should be past this by now. They're going to be grieving that for years. But it won't be at the same intensity of the beginning, unless, like I said, it's a trauma is freezing it, or there's complications like feelings of guilt, or like I couldn't save them, or it's my fault, and all these kind of things that need to be addressed. So you can keep that moving, but it should be moving over time. If not, see somebody like myself to help you get unstuck. But that's my recommendations on grief. Hopefully that's helpful. If you found anybody, if you think of anyone who is going through grief, has had loss, that seems to be stuck, please forward this information on to them, so then you can help them get unstuck or help them start to move through it. So once again, we are here every Tuesday night at 8:15. You can follow us here on Facebook throughout the week. We're also we have a group called the Mind Zone on Facebook, Gateway Center on Instagram, and you can watch a lot of previous videos I've done on addiction, trauma, all kinds of things on YouTube, or our website, gatewaycounseling.com, or Gateway Counseling Center on YouTube. I will see you guys next Tuesday at 8:15. If you have questions during the week, email me as much as you want at jonh@gatewaycounseling.com, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday night.